we are made up of energy, and we can't necessarily like quantify that with science. This universal energy is accessible to all of us. And I think there are different ways in which we can, leverage it for the benefit of other people and ourselves. What we've been discussing today and seeing is that there are so many ways to come home to yourself. Reiki is one, breathwork, meditation. There's so many more too, right? And for me, they all kind of work towards the same goal of like stripping back the layers, finding that like inner soul juiciness, finding ways to heal, pulling back different parts of ourselves so that we can come home.
Hi, welcome to The Way of the Heart. Today's conversation is with Ash Moraca. She's a certified Somatic Breathwork practitioner, a certified Reiki teacher, a registered yoga teacher, and a certified mindfulness meditation teacher. Through her own healing journey, she understood that all of these modalities can really help us overcome trauma and release old patterns. I love this conversation, and I hope you find it as wholesome as I did. Please enjoy this conversation. Hi, Ash. Welcome to The Way of the Heart. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I'm so happy that we made it happen. We met a few months ago, and even back then, I already had the idea to create this podcast in this format, conversations and with video. And I think I immediately asked you to be in the podcast, like the first day that we met.
I remember that.
Because obviously we connected and we were doing something that, of course, was very important for both of us and that really says a lot about the way that we feel in our heart, about the world, about our lives, about the way we approach life. And you also had really cool things happening. So I was really curious to know more and also excited to bring to the world or share with the world what you are doing, because I think that is something that I realize that I'm very passionate about, just really lifting people up and using the ways that I can to highlight other people's voices and work and gifts in general. So I'm so glad that you're here. So before we start talking about all of the different modalities that you are a facilitator of and that you have studied, I want to start with learning a little bit more about what took you to start being curious about those modalities and like what drew you to that. Was there anything? I mean, I feel like our childhood, of course, and the experiences that we accumulate throughout our lifetime, of course, are guides and they shape us into who we are today and what we're interested in. So anything that you want to share as far as like what drew you to start studying all of these modalities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a journey and not necessarily a linear path, that's for sure. Even when I think about, childhood, as you're saying, and kind of all of these experiences that shape us, I definitely grew up in a family that prioritized achievement, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But I think that for me, for the majority of my life, I kind of viewed my life in terms of achievements and was always kind of moving towards that next goal until I kind of burnt out. And I really was not happy. I was not fulfilled. I actually ended up running a marathon as part of one of my next achievements, and actually broke my hip running this marathon. So it was like I got to a place where I was just so disconnected from my body, from listening to kind of messages that were coming from inside of me, that I just put my head down. I was like, do this at all costs. I was really disconnected. So I actually think about that as almost like a turning point in my life, where then I had this, I had a stress fracture in my hip, and I was forced to be on crutches for months. And when you go from being like incredibly active to not, and that was kind of my outlet, that was like my, mental health kind of juice, if you will, I really struggled. And this was kind of like a turning point where I realized that the life I was living was not what I wanted. And this was 2018, 2019. And I made kind of like the first step that I made in switching things up was I was like, I want to go back to school. I want to take a year out of my life to really assess and understand kind of how I want to move forward. And so in the peak of COVID 2020, I actually moved over to the UK and I got my MBA. And that was a year-long program. And that is kind of the start of this new world and moving into, breathwork, meditation, yoga, because up until then, my life had really been about business. So I did my undergrad in business. I mean, I was still doing my master's in business. But yeah, after graduation, I was living abroad. I was living as a digital nomad, working on a bunch of different businesses. And basically my mental health took like a huge nosedive. I think that I was struggling with the uncertainty of so many different things when for my whole life, everything was very certain. There was like a very clear path as to like what I should follow or do next. So I was experiencing, relationship uncertainty with my friendships, how things were going to play out, my career, finances, not even knowing like where I was going to live the next, week or month because I didn't have a home. And it really just brought up kind of all of this stuff to the surface that I had like pushed down for so long. And in order to get through it, just really leaned into these different practices. That was kind of, I was in therapy, I was doing all of that too, but I really felt like I needed to find a way to just rely on myself and build these practices within myself. And eventually became a practitioner, as of meditation, somatic breathwork, yoga, and have transitioned to now running a business in this field too. So I have a meditation and breathwork app, which is growing. And yeah, it's been a really crazy, wild journey, kind of blending my past experiences of business and now into this new world. And like I said, not linear, but I'm really in a lot of ways grateful for the challenges that I've been through, because I think that, of course, it's shaped who I am, but it's also allowed me to like deeply empathize with people and to create something that ultimately will help people. That is my goal.
Mm. And I have a curiosity. When you went to the UK, and this happened after you broke your hip, right? Was this the first time that you were away from like your immediate circle?
It was. Yeah. Starting kind of from scratch. And there was, some fears around that too. Definitely.
Yeah. I feel like that those little trips that we take, especially at those young ages or, like at any point in our life. But I feel like when we take a step away from our immediate circle, that's when a lot of the introspection also starts happening, or like we start recognizing that a lot of the roles that we play in our immediate circle is what we basically keep feeding in a way, and that gives us that certainty of like the identity that we have. So I'm sure that combined with being a nomad and like all of these other things was a lot. It feels like it was definitely like the turning point. So let's talk about the modalities. I'm like interested to share more about these modalities with everyone. And I want to first start with your favorite modality. I would also like to know at some point which one was the first one that you studied, but let's talk about your favorite modality.
So I would say it kind of changes like on and off, but right now my favorite modality has to be somatic breathwork. And I discovered this a couple of years ago, and I find it really amazing for like moving energy in your body. So, there's obviously benefits to all these different modalities. And for somatic breathwork, it's, sometimes when you're in this like depressive, stuck energy, it can be really amazing for moving, stored energy, maybe trauma, stress out of the body. And so it's all using your breath. So it's like really deep, circular, connected breaths deep into your belly. A typical session is about an hour. That's like the full kind of extent. And most people experience a lot of emotional kind of release. Even sometimes in your body, you can feel things. Some people go to different realms. Some people get, I've had experiences where I've been like visited by my ancestors, really kind of profound experiences, incredibly, incredibly healing. I think what it does is it kind of removes almost like the really conscious part of your brain, and you can connect more to your subconscious, more to like, soul, if you want to describe it that way. And so it kind of breaks down this barrier where you're not judging the experience, you're not analyzing it, and you can really just kind of go deep within yourself.
I love all the description that you gave, and I have a lot of questions. So the first thing that comes to mind is what is happening? Like, yes, we're putting all of this oxygen, I guess, in the body.
Yeah, there's a ton of oxygen moving through your body. We also have a gland in our brain called the pineal gland. And when you're pumping a lot of oxygen into your body and into your brain and sending kind of signals up into the pineal gland, that's when some of those like psychedelic experiences almost can start to turn on. So that could be kind of what's happening for people when they're going through some of those experiences, really, which is really interesting. And I learned about this through Joe Dispenza. So that's like a big piece of kind of his work and really interesting.
That is very, very interesting. So when you had that experience being visited by your ancestors, can you share a little bit more about how that was?
Yeah, they basically were helping to remove like stored trauma from my body. And it was, it's not like I saw them with my physical eyes. It's kind of like this deeper level of perception that I kind of came to through, the experience of really like taking away the conscious of my, body and kind of persona. And, I really believe that our ancestors, our guides are with us all the time. And we just, we don't necessarily have the perception to tap into that all the time. But they're there and we can call on them whenever we want. And it's profound, to feel like that connection and that we're not alone.
I love that so much. I was listening to a video the other day while I was doing my research before we had this conversation. And I really loved something that she said about somatic breathwork. She was talking about how therapy and any type of mindset type of practice is obviously necessary, but there is the need to move the energy that is stored in the body. And I so resonated with that because I have a group of friends that we're always chatting, and it's kind of like the group in which we are all like venting and like sharing our emotional struggles and whatnot. And my friends go to therapy. I want to start going to therapy. This is for another story, another time, but like I currently don't go to therapy. I do have my practice, spiritual practice, my routines that really keep me as balanced and integrated as possible. But I always try to encourage them to not stay only with the practice of the mind and talking about, talking about it, just not talking about it. It's incredibly important to talk about it, but the energy needs to be moved. So practices like, all of the ones that you do, breath work and yoga as well, are so incredibly important. So I love that you're also bringing that, what you learned from Dr. Joe Dispenza, which is like the scientific evidence base, but really so that it gives way or it bridges with the spiritual world, right? So having these experiences of connecting with ancestors, which I love that you share that. one of the things that we did before starting the podcast was setting an intention for the podcast or for this conversation. And usually in my intentions or prayers, I always, like, that's one of the things that I invoke, I guess. So I really love that you're honoring that as well. So how do you practice breath work yourself? So one thing is obviously facilitating it, I assume. And another one is practicing yourself. Like, do you have mini sessions, or like, when could people use breath work? Like if they're going to a stressful meeting or they're having a stressful day, because I know there's different types of breaths that you can take.
Yeah. For me, I mean, I like to do a daily practice, and I kind of switch it up depending on what I'm feeling. So, meditation can be a beautiful practice, of course, but if I'm feeling like in kind of a depressive energy, I know meditation's not really going to be that helpful for me. So I will do a practice of breath work, usually somatic breath work, to really like clear that out with the intention of like, okay, I want to move this through my body. I want to feel clear at the end of this. And, I mentioned kind of the longer full session. I typically do that like once a week or once every 2 weeks as like a big reset. So I'll spend an hour. Sometimes I listen to my own recordings that I have on my app, or I will just listen to like really amazing music, kind of like shamanic drumming, which helps to move the energy as well. And then on kind of a more, regular basis, like every day during my practice, if I choose to do breath work, even just 10, 15 minutes of it is really, really powerful and kind of can just like be a little tune up to reset yourself. So there's periods of like really intensive breathing in and out through the mouth, and then periods of breath holds where you can kind of have these moments of clarity, downloads, really beautiful experiences that I mentioned. And yeah, it's another big piece of it is around like this specific style is around actually regulating the nervous system as well. So the first part of the session is typically in and out through the mouth, which is like an upregulation. It's actually stressing the nervous system to release. And then the back half of the session is moving into breathing in and out through the nostrils, nasal breathing, which is more calming of the nervous system. So you don't leave the session feeling dysregulated. Like the goal is to release, but then also like calm your system. Because I know there's other breath works that are amazing. I've found them sometimes to be a little bit dysregulating. Like you leave and you're like, wow, what year is it? Who am I? So this style of somatic breath work I find really powerful for that reason.
I had that question, so I'm glad that you answered that. I didn't know what the difference was between breathing in through the nose and breathing in through the mouth. Like, what's the difference? But you just explained that. So let's talk about, unless you want to share anything else about breath work, let's talk about your second most favorite. And just because I'm curious, was breath work the first modality that you studied, or?
That I studied was, they all kind of happened around the same time. Okay. Within the span of like 4 months.
Really?
Yeah, which is interesting. Yoga was actually the first, and then somatic breathwork, then meditation. And in terms of my own practice, I started practicing yoga when I was maybe 15 and meditating when I was maybe 22. I'm 31 now, turning 32. So yeah, it's been a few, almost a decade plus of some of these modalities. Yeah.
So what's your second favorite?
Probably meditation. It's just something you can do at any point in time, and I love that. Like you can meditate and no one has to know. And even just having a mindful breath, it's like you can kind of create this little cocoon within yourself, and it's having that place to come home to. And cultivating that through the years has been like hugely beneficial for my own just well-being in general. And it does take time. And I think, a lot of people struggle with meditation. A lot of people have the monkey mind, as do I some days too. And when you don't necessarily have like this practice, it's difficult to cultivate that. But I would just say that like it's an opportunity to come back to yourself like each and every day. And it's like a moment of self-love and telling yourself that you are worthy of a practice like that. Mm-hmm.
I'm biased with meditation, and we met doing our mindfulness meditation certification. Was there anything that you learned in that training that was different from what you thought of meditation or the way that you were practicing throughout the years?
I really loved the focus on the Brahma Viharas, so like the 4 heart-centered practices of mindfulness. I had done meditations on apps before where, I realized that that's what I was doing, like sending loving kindness to myself, to others, but I didn't really understand the reason behind it or like the history behind some of these practices. And so that was like surprising to me. And it kind of blew open this whole new dimension of meditation in a sense. It's not just about like quieting your thoughts and sitting in stillness. It's actually about cultivating like heart and love and being gentle and compassionate with yourself and others. So I think it definitely took me to kind of this next stage in my journey with it.
I love that you share that because it was exactly the same experience for me. I mean, there were a lot of different things that I learned from the very structured way that we learned what mindfulness really is, because I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions around all of these practices really, which I also want to talk to you about. And I forgot to ask you about breathwork when it comes to misconceptions. We'll talk about it in a second. But to me, while I didn't necessarily think that I was not supposed to think during meditation, to know that it's actually not the goal, at least with the mindfulness modality, was really liberating in a way. Because just like you, I would use apps that I would do guided meditation. So in my head, I was not doing any type of modality. I was just doing a guided meditation. But learning that structure and learning to cultivate kindness around noticing the thoughts and really becoming familiar with the thoughts was game changer. But really the game changer was the Brahma Viharas. Like to me, that was also beautiful. And something that was really interesting to me was that back then I was recording solo episodes for the podcast. And right before we started to learn about the Brahma Viharas, I had recorded a podcast that the name was like the unmeasurable, maybe unmeasurable currencies, which, Brahma Viharas are also called the unmeasurable qualities of the heart, like they have, and in that podcast, I was talking very similar things when we had the class of like the Brahma Viharas, which I was like, I have no idea what this is.
Yeah.
And then they started talking about, loving kindness, what it is. I'm like, oh my goodness, like
just intuitively, you knew.
And it was beautiful also to have that almost like a validation that there is value in these practices. And there is, this is an ancient practice, right? It's been practiced for 2,500 years at this point. And to me, being a little self-conscious, this is something that we've talked about before recording the podcast, being a little self-conscious about this type of message, hearing or just having that validation from an ancestral teaching was like, oh my God, I can actually really rely on this, teach this. It was beautiful. Plus, actually learning the structure itself and learning how to do it quote unquote properly was a game changer for my practice as well. So how do you practice meditation today?
So in the mornings, I usually just sit and kind of see what comes. So practice first connecting with my breath. I find that really can kind of allow me to sink in more deeply, and connecting to my heart and kind of seeing if there's messages, just being kind of like really mindful around what's coming through. and letting my intuition really guide me in terms of, what the practice should look like, or maybe it's breath work, but kind of really starting and getting really in tune with myself. I find that's the best kind of modality for me.
What helps you with the thoughts? Like what do you practice? Like, do you say something to yourself when you really notice like a very chattery mind, or like, very chaotic or whatnot? What do you usually practice?
I try to zoom out and try to focus actually on areas in my body that feel really calm and centered, and think about, but be kind of this gentle observer, like embody what that gentle observer is, feel into that energy. And I find I'm able to sit in a place where I'm looking down upon myself and noticing the thoughts, but not getting attached to them. And then they kind of subside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is one of the main lessons that I've had from this specific modality, and is like the nature of impermanence with our thoughts, with life, with the breath, with, everything. I'm thinking about, for the listeners that maybe are not so familiar with the Brahma Viharas and how to practice them. How do you like to practice? Like, which one of the qualities? If you maybe want to talk about the qualities briefly, just to share a little bit of that and how you practice it.
Yeah. The one I love the most is probably metta, so loving kindness. And that is really an offering of cultivating loving kindness, like within your heart, offering it to others, those who might be very easily, able to give love towards, those who might be more difficult. Also just people that might be acquaintances that you feel kind of neutral towards. And then finally yourself. And so I feel that is like one of the main starting points of the Brahma Viharas, like kind of mastering that skill of cultivating loving kindness, because it's not always easy. You might not, always feel that towards other people or yourself. But I think, that's kind of cracks you open, opens you up to all these, the other pieces. Yeah.
And do you practice that with like a feeling that you kind of like, emanate in a way, or with like phrases, or how do you practice
both?
Metta?
Yeah. So both in kind of the physical feeling of like, what does my heart feel like to offer loving kindness, and, vibrating or radiating that out. And then also through, mantra or silently offering in the mind phrases like, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be safe, may you feel love, may you feel kindness, may you know yourself.
Even just when you say them, I'm like, I have this connection with this practice. Like, it is ingrained. It's like, it's in my cells. There's something that my body goes like, it's like an antenna. Like, I immediately start to feel it. Yeah, I love it. So I had an experience when we first started practicing the Brahma Viharas. And, for the listeners, if you're curious and maybe you go online or on any app and you look for them, most likely you'll find what Ash just shared. It is a practice of phrases, at least to begin with, but a lot of people have resistance towards the phrases because it feels very like cold sometimes. But I want to share this experience just to like encourage people to actually do it. So I think this was like the first week that we started practicing it. And I was myself, like, even though I felt how beautiful it felt a little bit like, I don't even know the word for it, but I was like, why am I repeating these phrases? It was like doubt, started to come up, and just questioning, like, is this doing anything? Like, is this really doing anything? Just repeating these things. And I think my puppy at the time was brand new. So we adopted her. She's really loud. She has some traumas and whatnot. So she gets really scared with anything and everything. So it was around 6 a.m. and I'm practicing my meditation and I started practicing metta with the phrases, and my dog starts barking like crazy. And I had asked my husband to take care of her because I was going to do my meditation and I wanted to have a peaceful session. And I hear her barking and I hear my husband just doing his thing. He's not doing anything about it. So my meditation turned into just like dealing with this feeling of anger and just like really noticing it. But, you know, I'm human. I really had expectations of this practice, which not recommended for meditation. Don't have an expectation for your practice. But I had this expectation. So that added to this fire, right? I was adding wood to the fire of anger because I was like, she's barking, my husband is not doing anything, and this was supposed to be a really peaceful session. So I was like, you know what? Just keep doing the phrases, just keep doing it. And I think by the time I got to sending love and kindness or sending, you know, like these wishes to someone that, you know, it's easy to send love to, I immediately had this memory, like it just came out of nowhere. The day before I had been watching, I think I was watching a podcast, and the guest shared something that her ex-boyfriend had done that was like a beautiful act of love. When I watched the podcast, I thought like, wow, that was so beautiful. It moved me. I don't think I cried, but during my meditation, when the memory came up, doing love and kindness practice, metta practice, the memory just like came and I started crying, but it felt like it cleansed me. Like the anger completely went away. And I was just like grateful. I was like, people are beautiful. The fact that this guy did that. And like, I just started to think about all of the things that were beautiful and the people that I love. And I was like, oh, this is what the phrases do. Like, this is what it really does. It opens up the heart. It opens up the capacity to love and to be compassionate and to be more tolerant and to be, you know, all of those things. So thank you so much for sharing the practice, because I feel like it is one that may be a little bit weird at the beginning, but it really, really changes the meditation practice. One last thing that I want to share to that is that I felt like you said, it changed my meditation practice from understanding or feeling, experiencing it at an individual level. It was the moment I was like, oh, this is supposed to be for everyone. Even though I had already noticed the difference that it made in my relationships and in my circle, I was like, oh, this is for everyone. It's not just for me. It's not a individual gain type of practice. It's for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think to your point, it doesn't need to like look a certain way either, right? Like if those phrases really aren't resonating, like, you know, what might you say to like your best girlfriend? Like, you look amazing today. Like, I hope you feel incredible. Like, that's an act of metta. And find kind of what resonates with you so that it feels authentic, so that you want to like tap into it. And I think the whole point is that then you can tap into it at any point in time. Like, you might be driving your car and being like, oh, I just want to offer myself love in this moment. And you have it right there for you. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we can talk about meditation forever because, like I said at the beginning, I am biased. So Reiki is another one of the modalities that you studied. Mm-hmm. What is Reiki?
The way I would describe it is basically like there is universal energy accessible to all of us. And Reiki is the process of cultivating that energy and putting it towards something, having an intention behind it. So most like Reiki practitioners use it to like heal the physical body. I personally believe it can be healed or used to heal like emotional traumas as well within the body or not. So I don't really practice on other people necessarily, but I do on myself. So the way I was taught is if you kind of rub your hands together and pull them apart, you can tap into and feel this energy between your hands. And I like to do this for myself when I go to sleep. If I feel like there's a part of my body that like needs some love or is like feeling, I'll just tap into this energy and direct it towards these parts of my body with love, with tenderness, kindness, and allow the energy to kind of like radiate through my body and remove blockages. And I do sometimes practice it on people in like a somatic breathwork session where they might be holding on to something, and it can just help to, release it a little bit more. Yeah, it's definitely like an esoteric thing to try to explain, right? We are made up of energy, and we can't necessarily like quantify that with science. And so, this universal energy is accessible to all of us. And I think there are different ways in which we can, leverage it for the benefit of other people and ourselves.
So with Reiki, is it a practice or a modality that you have to have a facilitator, or can you learn to do it yourself? Well, I think you kind of said that already. So if, for example, you give me a session, part of what you show me, can I apply that in my own life? Does that make sense? Like if someone that is listening and they're like, okay, I want to have the experience of having a session with someone that offers or practices Reiki, will they be able to bring that with them to their house, to, their work, or whenever they feel like they can apply or use that energy in that way?
I would say it's not quite the same in the sense of like once you learn to meditate, because it's typically like the practitioner or the facilitator is kind of doing it in their own space and energetics. So as the person receiving, you're not really like conscious of what's happening. You're kind of just laying and receiving. But I would say anyone can like learn how to do this, and it's not like hard, quote unquote. But probably taking a course would be best to kind of understand how it's all working and be able to practice on yourself or other people.
I feel like this may be a modality in which the practice of, or not even the practice, what's the word that I'm looking for? Like belief is really integrated in like taking a session or like being, someone else working with your energy. I think maybe it could be similar to acupuncture in a way that if you're doing it without believing that it works, you may not feel anything. Things may be happening at the energetic level, but maybe like to really fully feel it, it's not the same, right? Like I think belief is a huge part of this practice.
100%. Yeah, I fully believe that. And I've just seen in my own life, like the more belief I have and intention that I have behind something, the more it comes to fruition. And yeah, I'm a huge advocate for, believing in something, but obviously like in order to believe in something, it has to feel authentic to you. So if, what I'm saying or Reiki does not feel authentic, it might not be like the right modality, and that's totally okay. There'll be other modalities. I think, what we've been discussing today and seeing is that there are so many ways to come home to yourself. Reiki is one, breathwork, meditation. There's so many more too, right? And for me, they all kind of work towards the same goal of like stripping back the layers, finding that like inner soul juiciness, finding ways to heal, pulling back different parts of ourselves so that we can come home.
I love that you keep saying that phrase, because of course we are in the Way of the Heart podcast. And to me, the heart is really our home, right? It's the direct contact that we have with source, the universe, with God, however everyone feels more comfortable with. And to me, that is home, right? Like that very common phrase that we are human beings we're spiritual beings. I got it wrong. We're spiritual beings having a human experience, which to me, that connection with the heart is coming home. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about yoga. So you've been practicing yoga, you said before, since you were 15. Mm-hmm. And were you practicing yoga when you had your injury, your hip injury? On and off. So you had to stop basically practicing yoga during that time.
Yeah. For probably 6 months, I didn't practice because, putting any type of pressure on my hip joint was like not, like very good for it. But on and off, I would say I've had like an interesting relationship with yoga. In the beginning, I didn't really understand kind of like what it was all about, but knew that I liked it. I remember even having huge challenges like laying in Shavasana, like at the end when you're just still, like the chatter, everything inside of me just wanted to like get up and move. And so like looking back, it's been a really interesting journey in that sense of, wow, like the compounding effects of a practice, of something that you've been doing for so long is really interesting to see. And I had for a couple of years been curious about doing my yoga teacher training. And I think it was a really incredible tool just to go deeper into my own practice. And I'm teaching yoga here and there. It doesn't necessarily like call deeply to me, teaching yoga and that piece. But I think it was also a really amazing opportunity to like step into this teacher's seat. So see what it would be like to teach a class. And that led me onto all these other modalities that like feel like, oh yeah, this is like what I'm supposed to be doing. It's always been a tool, I guess, in so many different ways for me.
I think that all of these modalities, right, are tools. And that's why, to what you were saying before, not every tool is going to work for everyone or for every case, for every situation, for every experience. It really, I guess this is why it's so beneficial to have like the knowledge of all of these different modalities, because then you'll be able to discern when it's actually beneficial to use them depending on what you're going through. Like you said before, if you're kind of like in a more depressive state, maybe for you, meditation is not the right practice at the moment. So I really love that you're bringing all of this together. And let's talk about the misconceptions that I mentioned before. What are if you have run into any people, that have misconceptions about these practices, that you've been able to say like, yeah, this is definitely not correct. And it would be actually very beneficial if we talk about that, because that's not the way it is.
I think one of the main things, and I'm sure you hear this too, is just people saying, oh, I can't meditate. And I firmly believe everyone can. It might be more challenging for certain people where they feel like they can't because of, what's going on in their brain. But I would say that like each little space you get between each thought is, if you're paying attention, is a meditation. And so just to, let people know or make them maybe feel a little bit better that everyone can do it. And it's just about like starting. It's about taking like 20 seconds. And then like, again, the compounding effects of that over time will allow you to have like a calmer, a more peaceful state of mind, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. What about the other practices? Do you ever hear anything that is a misconception, either breath work or Reiki, yoga?
Yeah. With breath work, I feel, breath work can be challenging. I almost like to think about it as going for a run. Like the first 10, 15 minutes of running are really hard. Sometimes the whole run is hard, but you kind of get into a groove after a little bit of time. Your body gets used to it. And so I think maybe with breath work, some people stop just like a little too short, or, it's hard. It's almost like working out a muscle that you have to train and get better at. I think that's true for all of these practices. And so, yeah, if it's feeling hard, like it's okay. And part of the journey is like pushing through that challenge, I think. And just, yeah, to give people like a little bit of like a boost and like, you can do it, you know? And I think with breath work for myself personally, like I just feel incredible afterwards. So it's almost like that runner's high, and it's worth pushing through like a little bit of discomfort to get there.
I think there's a huge part of this practice is that quietly they're teaching us this, or they're inviting us to do this, which is like loving ourselves and being patient with ourselves and compassionate towards ourselves. Because like I said before, with like sharing about my experience with the meditation and the Brahma Viharas, so many times we come into these practices with a very rigid expectation. We should be good at it, or it should look like this or whatnot. And when it's not happening, then we get very frustrated, or we give up and we don't come to the class again or whatever. And I think that what is actually happening is that they're quietly inviting us to gently approach these practices, to really be patient, to love ourselves in the process, which I think is so incredibly important. And it's one of the things that yoga, for example, taught me. I feel like for you, your own relationship with yoga was actually a beautiful, like I see it as a beautiful relationship, because I feel like so many of us go into yoga with this really, again, rigid expectation of it should look like this, or I should be able to do this pose or that pose. And to me, for example, when I started, I went to a power class the first time. And I was like, holy shit, what is this? What is happening to me? I am like in the worst shape ever. And I became really critical of myself, of my, like, how did you get to this point that you cannot even do a yoga class? Also being very ignorant about what the practice really is. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to slow flow classes, because clearly that's where my body's at. And I'm so thankful that I did that, because I think that I'm circling back a little bit with like what you shared at the beginning of this idea of like very achieving things. These practices can be approached in that way for sure. And staying away from that is a beautiful gift that we can give to ourselves. And back then, when I had that experience with yoga in the power class, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go do slow flow, because this is what my body needs right now. I think back then I thought that I was being lazy, but now I see that I was so wise to do it.
Yeah. You listen to your body.
Right. Because I listened to my body, and because I was able to do slow flow for a whole year, until my body was like, okay, you're ready to try something that is a little bit more challenging physically. And then, you know, that.
You're the foundation.
Right. And I had the foundation. And then I started to see how the relationship that I had with myself was changing too. Because I got to a point where I was like, oh, I sustained this habit, or, you know, like I'm keeping up with this practice. And, you know, before I was not able to do that, because I was going all in with things and having this really high expectation of the practices, whether that was yoga or any other workout. And approaching it this way was really a gift that I gave myself without knowing it. And today I'm like, oh, you know what? That was actually a very beautiful thing that I did. So I think that is beautiful that you had a similar, in a way, experience with yoga, because I feel like that is the one modality that a lot of us now, especially like in the West, approach it with this very, like, it's an exercise and it has to look this way. And I think in a way it takes away from the beauty and the gift of the practice.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I'm sure I'm doing it wrong in many other ways, but at least with that, I'm like, oh, it can actually be a beautiful training in the way that I relate to myself and my body and my mind and my heart and all of it.
Yeah. And to your point, like, I think yoga in the West is most of the time seen as just like an exercise. And there's so much like philosophy and like deep historical wisdom around yoga and this way of life and this way of being. It's like sacred geometry and, you know, all of these like incredible, like powerful poses that are pulling energy from the earth and the sky. And it's like, there's so much more to it that I think it's like beautiful as like a tool to keep coming back to and to keep learning from. Like there's so much there. Yeah,
absolutely. Did you, in your training, did you learn only about like the asanas of like the poses, or did they give you also a broader kind of like lesson on the other limbs of yoga?
Yeah, we kind of went more broad as well on like the 8-limbed path, and learning kind of like a little bit of the philosophy behind it, historical. So that was great to kind of get this like well-rounded viewpoint.
I think that I've felt curiosity too. I felt like the call to take a yoga teacher training because I love that part the most. I'm like what you said before with our training in mindfulness meditation, like my favorite part was learning about the ancestry of this, like the history behind it. There's something that really calls me to learn about all of these things.
Maybe you lived it in a past life.
I think so. And I don't know, especially with mindfulness, I think so. I do have like this connection. I came back from a silent retreat recently and I did a monastic retreat.
Wow.
In, you know, Buddhism, and specifically the Theravadan lineage. And it was once again one of those moments where I'm like, yeah, there's a recognition here of something.
And it's like a full body knowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the last question that I'm going to ask you is about Retreat, your app. So tell me a little bit about the app. What is it about? What's the intention behind it?
Yeah. So something I'm so passionate about. And Retreat really came about, as I mentioned, because of my own mental health struggles and going down this path of trying to find healing for myself and kind of, you know, exploring all of these modalities, finding some of these like new interesting modalities and realizing like they're not that accessible to people or approachable for people. So the first kind of iteration of Retreat is offering modern meditation, somatic breathwork, and kind of like high vibrational sounds as well. But really the broader vision is to offer, you know, a bunch of different practices and masterclasses on different topics to help people with their mental health. So whether that's, you know, things like EMDR or family constellations or rebirthing, kind of like the whole, you know, basis of our conversation around there are so many tools out there that people don't know about. And there are ways for you to learn it. Like this is a way for people to learn about them, to explore deeper, to get connected to the right practice at the right time for their healing. And yeah, it's been a beautiful journey of like exploring myself, all of these, you know, various modalities and, you know, stepping into this role of a teacher seat and launching the app with my own breathwork and meditation. So it's been really powerful, and just hearing the feedback from people has been incredible. And I'm loving the journey.
I love it. And it's beautiful too.
Thank you.
It's nice to look at, which I love.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah. I think that we can start wrapping it up. And I would love to ask you 3 questions. The first one is, how do you think these practices are tapping into the wisdom of the heart, even though you already shared a little bit of that? But if there's anything else that you want to share about that.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate, you know, I think it is about, depending on the modality, but most of it is like stripping back the layers, finding different ways to get in and find your heart, whether it's breath work that's releasing energy, whether that's meditation that's like calming your mind to allow you to see more clearly inside of your heart. You know, it's just a return. It's a return.
I love that. What do you think the world needs right now the most?
I think the world needs more love, and people need to love themselves. I think when we can give ourselves love, then we can radiate that out to other people. And so that's like my personal practice right now. It's just like, how can I show up for myself and give myself love when I need it? Yeah.
I love that. And what do you think love is?
Love is all around us. It's where we came from. It's universal life force energy. It's God, if you want, to put a name to it. I think it's the basis on which we exist. Mm-hmm.
I love that. Thank you so much, Ash, for sharing all of your wisdom and your experiences. I would love to keep talking to you off camera too. Where can people find you? Is there anything that you're offering besides, of course, retreat that you would like people to know about?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. My handle is Ash Moraca, and you can also follow Retreat, and our handle is the Retreat app. I'd love to offer your listeners a month free of the app, and then a discount as well if they choose to do like the annual subscription. So we can share that maybe in like the show notes with your subscribers. But yeah, would just love to kind of, make this really accessible and approachable for people.
I will love that. Thank you so much. Yes, we'll add that on the notes of the show. And thank you so much for your energy, for your time, for being here. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a, deep conversation, and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. There were so many beautiful moments that I found in this conversation. And there's something so beautiful about people that are open to share their own experience, and yet at the same time understand that not every single one of us is going to have the same journey. So simply by offering our own experience, we can maybe give inspiration to others to walk their own path. All of these modalities that we talked about today, and as Ash reminded us a couple times throughout the conversation, are really meant for us to come back home, to come back to our hearts. And we will all have a modality that we will prefer. And these are all meant to be supportive in our own journey of healing and releasing old patterns and breaking some of those structures and programmings that we've had that are not allowing us to expand our capacity to connect with others and to love each other and to love ourselves. So if there is anything in this conversation that you think anyone that you know will benefit from, please share this conversation. Please give yourself the opportunity and the ability to witness or experience some of these modalities. I love you so much. I will see you in the next episode.